It is good to see all of you tonight. I feel fine. I feel very blessed. Whatever happened to me was about a 3-hour ordeal, and so I don't know. But anyway, I feel good, and so I'm glad to be able to be here. In fairness to you, I'm going to leave the mask on, and in fairness to you, I'll stay up here. I know I'm within the CDC window of when I should, one more day of still wearing a mask, and so I'll do that just to play by the rules and protect the front. Although we all know that the front of church buildings are just packed. Every building in the country, the front rows are always the most prominently used. But anyway, I'll steer clear. We are in the book of Ezekiel. And can you hear me okay? I hope with the mic, I'm wearing it a little higher, and hopefully you can hear me okay. And as we go through our study tonight, we've been working on Ezekiel. I made some promises when I introduced the book. I've broken all of those in my efforts to try to get through a lesson here. But so what I've kind of decided to do, I'm going to calm down about that a little bit, but we'll just keep looking at it from this macro approach, though. I do still want to look at it from a big picture approach. We'll try to keep up with it as we go and try not to get bogged down in the details. I think that's a mistake if we get carried away with trying to make too much out of the details. We'll miss the bigger pictures. And if we miss the big pictures, we really miss the lessons that come out of the book of Ezekiel. And so I've been trying to do that. I'll continue to try to do that as we study together. And we're in chapters 2 and 3 today. And in the lesson sheets, it's about 2/3 of the way down in lesson 2. If you're looking at those. And kind of chapters 2 and 3 are kind of worked together, hand in hand as it relates to the messaging. And just for continuity's sake, I want to take you to Ezekiel chapter 3. Look at verses 17 and 18. We talked about how this section was kind of the theme of these two chapters. And we remind ourselves that this is kind of, in this section, what God's trying to challenge Ezekiel to recognize. He needs to be what? A watchman. He needs to be a watchman over the people. Was it going to be easy to do that? No, it was not going to be easy to do that. It was going to be challenging for him to be the watchman that God would desire for him to be. And why was that? Right, they were not going to want to listen. What kind of imagery did he share as it relates to when he takes the message to him? It'd be like what? Having their foreheads, right? Like having their foreheads pressed against each other. This was going to be a challenge. And yet, Son of Man, verse 17 of Ezekiel chapter 3, I have made thee a watchman unto the house of Israel. Therefore hear the word at my mouth, and give them warning from me when I say unto the wicked, thou shalt surely die, and thou givest him not warning, nor speakest to warn the wicked from his wicked way to save his life. The same wicked man shall die in his iniquity, but his blood will I require at thine hand. So, if the sinner, if the one committing iniquity doesn't change, then he's still accountable to what? God. His own sin, right? And he's personally, the sinner is still accountable. But if the watchman says nothing, now he what? He also is accountable. He's also accountable. So Ezekiel, listen, I know this is going to be hard. I know it's going to be unreceptive. I know this is going to be challenging beyond description, but you need to go do it. You need to fulfill this purpose that I've given to you, because somebody needs to go tell them this. I've chosen you to do it. If you don't, they're still going to be lost. But now you're going to have an extra level of accountability too, because you were given the specific obligation to go and to speak to them. Now, are there any applications from that?
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and if you couldn't hear what Kim said, she said, I fear yes, but I hope not, as it relates to a specific application. And I understand what she's saying, because it is concerning, right? Now, I think that answer is actually correct, by the way. And here's why. I think we do have some level of responsibility to stand up for what's right, and be willing to speak about those things, and be honest about those things, and tell the truth about what God has said is right and wrong and stand upon those moral principles and purposes that God has given to us. Not in the same way Ezekiel was challenged to do it. And that's why I say your answer is correct in the yes and no. Because God's got a specific audience in mind for Ezekiel. God's got a specific time period in mind for Ezekiel. God's got a specific situation in mind for Ezekiel. God has certain types of sins and iniquities that transgressors had done specifically towards him as God's people. There's some very peculiar things as it relates to Ezekiel that you and I do not have, that you and I do not share, that Ezekiel did. None of us have been called to be a prophet for God's people. And so in that sense, Ezekiel is different. But from a practical sense, there is some responsibility that we have to speak the truth and tell the truth and be honest about what God says is right and wrong in various circumstances. So that's the warning, and that's kind of where we left 2 weeks ago, since I had to unfortunately miss last week. And again, I appreciate Kent catching up with us. So look at your question sheets. Then there's a second question. What command then does Jehovah, with all that refresher in mind, what command does Jehovah now give in chapter 2 and verse 8? And so let's go back. And again, I know we're bouncing back and forth a little bit, but the reason for that is these are parallel texts in chapters 2 and chapter 3. So in verse 8, "But thou, son of man, hear what I say unto thee. Be not thou rebellious like that rebellious house. Open thy mouth and eat that I give thee." And we talked a little bit about that 2 weeks ago. "When I looked, behold, an hand was sent unto me, and lo, a roll of a book was therein. And he spread it before me, and it was written within and without. Then there was written therein lamentations and mourning and woe." So what kind of message is this that Ezekiel's going to have to go take to the people? Yeah, it won't be popular, and it won't be very pleasant. What? Yeah, it won't be pleasant to talk. Go ahead, I'm sorry, I talked to you. That's right. And so it's lamentations, it's mourning, it's sorrow, it's all the kinds of things that nobody likes to talk about. And yet that's going to be the message that Ezekiel has to go declare before the people. Now jump to chapter 3, verse 1. "And moreover, he said unto me, Son of man," there's that phrase, by the way, "eat that thou findest, eat this roll, and speak unto the house of Israel." So what's the command that he's given? Okay, to eat these words, to eat this scroll. What does Ezekiel receive from him, that message? And what is he told to do with it? We've kind of already answered that. Here's the point. What does that mean? Why do you think, here's this message, and on 2 different occasions, you need to eat this message? What do you think he means by that?
Totally ingest it, totally absorb it.
Okay. And I think that's right. I think that the imagery here is simply you need to ingest this message. It needs to become part of you, Ezekiel. This isn't a message that can be delivered in a superficial kind of way. This isn't go write a note to somebody and slip it to them. This message needs to be appreciated, respected, accepted by Ezekiel in order for it to be delivered in the right way. Have you ever listened to somebody speak and you knew they really didn't believe what they were saying to you? Now, I'm not saying, I'm not trying to say, well, maybe people have lied to you. But I'm not even talking about that, though, necessarily, where somebody's just looking at you and you know they're lying to you. That's not really what I mean by that. What I mean by it is they're delivering information, but they don't necessarily believe in that information. No, don't go there, Brian. You could watch political people do that all the time. And I don't care what party you're from, what issue you're talking about, what the subject matter is, all that's irrelevant because the political world does it on every side. They're given a message that they are given their marching orders to go out and present, And they go out, and you can almost hear it in their voice. You can see it in their eyes. They don't even believe what it is they're telling people. Ezekiel can't be that way. That's the point I'm trying to make. Ezekiel can't be that way. When Ezekiel goes, and he's going to deliver this message to the people, it's got to be believable. Because if it's not believable, is it going to help them? Absolutely not. It will be of no help to them whatsoever. If they're not convinced, the prophet doesn't even believe it. Why should I believe it? Why should I respond to it if Ezekiel doesn't even seem to believe what it is he's saying? And so ingest it. Make it a part of you. It's similar to what we see with whom? We mentioned this 2 weeks ago. With John, right? John the Revelator in Revelation. Not exactly the same, but sort of. That imagery of eat this message, consume it. Let it become part of you. Thoughts, questions about that? All right, so that scene unfolds. So then where does he get sent? Verse 22 of chapter 3. Okay, so the hand of the Lord's there upon me, verse 22 of chapter 3. And he said unto me, Arise, go forth into the plain, and I will there talk with thee. So he goes to the plain, and why does he go? Because God told him to, and God's going to talk to him, okay? God's going to talk to him. Verse 23. Then I arose and went forth into the plain, and behold, the glory of the Lord stood there as the glory which I saw by the river Chebar, and I fell on my face. Now you remember that scene, right? We're still trying to wrap our brains around that whole, tremendous vision of these wheels inside of wheels, and the fire, and 4 heads, and all looking different, and all these wings, and you've got this tremendous imagery. And then Ezekiel says, I went over here to the plain, I saw the glory of the God in the same way, but here's the key. What's he do? Fell back down. Just like he did before. When he recognizes he was coming into very immediate presence of God, he falls down when he sees it. Verse 24. Then the Spirit entered me and set me upon my feet. Pause for a moment. Think about it. You fall down at the presence of the glory that's before you. And now I've had some people help me up off the floor. I can't imagine what it would have been like to have whatever this Spirit is take me from a fall down position to my feet. But that's what the text. So you can imagine the power, and that's what I'm trying to get the imagery here. You imagine how he must have felt that one minute I'm trying to show my respect and admiration for the God that I'm coming into the presence of, and this Spirit hits me again, and back to my feet I go. And he spoke with me and said to me, Go, shut thyself within thine house. And so hear these continued instructions. Go to the plain. You're going to get a message there. Sees the glory of God again. Initially falls down, rises up to his feet, and he's told to go and to shut himself in his house. Here's this picture, if you will, of Ezekiel and the various circumstances that God places him in. Let's finish the verses here, and then we'll finish the chapter. He said, But thou, O son of man, behold, they shall put bands upon thee, and shall bind thee with them. And thou shalt not go out among them. And I will make thy tongue cleave to the roof of thy mouth, and thou shalt be dumb, and shalt not be to them a reprover, for they are a rebellious house. But when I speak with thee, I will open thy mouth, and thou shalt say unto them, Thus saith the Lord God, He that heareth, let him hear, and he that forbeareth, let him forbear, for they are a rebellious people. So, really in some ways, does it seem almost, one minute he says, you're not going to what? You're not going to, and you're going to shut, you're not going to speak. But then when I come and I come upon you, then I'm going to open your mouth, and then you then you will speak, right? And so there's this interesting kind of imagery. And I think really maybe that what the picture we might have is there's this binding up of Ezekiel, and I don't know that it's literal, but more of this figure to the idea that Ezekiel would feel as though he was bound and cannot speak. Possibly, there's going to be periods of silence, to have a different effect upon those hearers. One minute you're speaking and the next you're silent. Then God comes back and He delivers more information and He just opens your mouth up again and you begin to speak again. It reminds me a little bit, can you think of somebody in the New Testament that didn't speak for a while? There you go. That's the one I was thinking of anyway. Zacharias, if you recall, went about how long? 9 months, right? 9 months, a silence, and yet his silence did what? It spoke volumes of the significance of this circumstance that he had found himself in prior to the coming of John the Baptist. All I'm trying to illustrate to you is that God doesn't have to speak in order to speak. God's silence is also a message. Let me give you maybe a more modern, something we'd understand a little bit better maybe. When we talk about the subject of biblical authority, and we talk about the subject of silence, we recognize that the fact that God didn't speak or didn't authorize is a message within itself. That God's silence, his decision to not speak and or authorize certain actions, purposes, works, is a message to us that we should do what? That we should be silent as well. Let's stay away from that. God didn't authorize that. God didn't permit that. God didn't teach us to do that. God didn't. And so all I'm trying to illustrate to you is that Ezekiel doesn't have to go around talking all the time to be a prophet. Even if there are periods where he's bound, he doesn't speak. It is still kind of a powerful imagery of message. Because the truth is, God's kind of what? With them. With the people. Yeah, he's angry. What else would you? Okay, they're rebellious, and I'm not trying to put words in God's mouth, obviously, but he's kind of tired of it. He's hit the end. The judgment's on its way. Consequences coming. Have you ever reached a point where you've spoke, it's rejected, people continue to be rebellious, ignore it, don't pay a lick of attention to it, and finally you what? Yeah, you just quit talking. Because there's nothing left to say. There are going to be times where there's nothing left to say, Ezekiel. We've warned, we've encouraged, we've rebuked, we've reproved, we've done everything we can. So some of the messaging is going to be his silence, and sometimes the messaging is going to be these mournings and lamentations and sorrows over the condition of the people. You're going to see that in both ways as it relates to Ezekiel. Let's add the final text that he offered in the lesson sheet, and that was Ezekiel chapter 4, verse 8, as a parallel. And behold, I will lay bands upon thee, and thou shalt not turn thee from one side to another, till thou hast ended the days of thy siege. This binding up imagery. Ezekiel's not going to be called upon to speak all the time. Sometimes the work of the prophet will be silence in a process. Thoughts, questions about any of those things? Go ahead, Marlene.
That God was telling Ezekiel there's time to be silent.
Yep.
There's a time to speak.
Yep, I agree with that. Yeah, there's going to be times where you need to be vocal, and there's going to be times where there's nothing left to be said. Yep. Any other thoughts, questions?
I think we can see
Go ahead,
that
Dan.
God had a great concern for them, even though they
Yep.
were rebellious, and for them having anything to do with it.
Yeah, it's as disappointing as it can be, and to see a father, that's God, who's hurt so badly by a rebellious family, by a whole host of his children who've chosen to walk in a completely different path than he led them on, and that is certainly part of this picture. Go ahead, Jim.
When a preacher is preaching the gospel, if they refuse it, you got to keep right on preaching it. You can't stop.
Yeah. There's times where that truth has to continue to be taught, and needs to be spoken. And we talked earlier, though, and then there are times where a period of silence may be necessary if people are trotting the gospel underfoot, and those kinds of things. But the truth has to continue to be declared. It can't stop just because people resist or refuse to honor it. So, and that kind of answers that, and maybe you had anything else on that last question for thought. Compare and contrast Ezekiel's duty as a prophet with that of a gospel preacher. And you've heard me already talk a little bit about that there are some practical parallels, not so much any specific parallels, because the roles are completely different and the situations are completely different. Go ahead, Amy.
With Ezekiel, he wasn't being given the opportunity to say anything that he might add to.
Yeah.
He was literally only going to be able to speak exactly what God told him to say.
Yeah. Ezekiel isn't left to try to determine what it is he will share with the people. There's a very specific nature to what he's going to be told to say unto the people. And again, that imagery of this Spirit moving him forward and this Spirit taking him from a prone position to his feet, and the power of that imagery is still there.
Wasn't his job as a prophet to be warning them of the coming destruction? It's not like God was sending Jonah to Nineveh to try to bring those people to repentance.
Right.
God's reached a point here where, like you said, I'm fed up.
Yeah, and it's very fascinating in a lot of ways, because it is God sending his prophet to deliver a message of what is going to happen, not something they can avoid or correct or try to change. And you might even wonder a little bit, well, then why? Why would God do that? Is it I told you so? Is it, what? And to me, it seems like it's important because at the end of the day, God wants them to know that when you behaved, I was doing what for you? That's what we're going to learn in the next couple of chapters, by the way. Yeah, I blessed you, right? While you behaved, I was blessing you. You rebelled, and consequence came. This isn't Nebuchadnezzar. This isn't Babylon. This isn't a foreign enemy. Ezekiel, go tell them this is their God acting. I think that's why he delivers this message. Not God being vindictive, but God wanting to make sure they understand that all the things they think are happening, and they think they can correct it by building allegiances with all these other foreign nations at times, and fighting against and resisting the God-chosen nation of Babylon to come down and bring this consequence. God wants them to know, no, this is me. I'm behind this every step of the way. Okay, if you're not in chapter 4 yet, get into chapter 4. Let's look, and this is lesson 3 now, if you're jumping lessons, and I will pull that one up. Uh-oh. Maybe I can. Close. Okay. So kind of that thematic verses that he gives for this text is actually over in chapter 5 for this context, beginning in verse 7. And therefore thus saith the Lord God, because you multiplied more than the nations that are round about you, and have not walked in my statutes, neither have kept my judgments, neither have done according to the judgments of the nations that are round about you, therefore thus saith the Lord God, behold, I, even I. There's that phrase I was talking to you about at the end of that course of study. I, even I, am against thee, and will execute judgments in the midst of thee in the sight of the nations. Though I did everything I could for you, you multiplied more than the nations round about you. You had success and benefit and blessing every step of the way. But that doesn't mean anything. The minute you become rebellious against me, I'm bringing judgments and consequences to you. And that kind of sets the stage, if you will, for chapters 4 and 5. So let's go back to the beginning of chapter 4, now that we got that imagery in our minds. So the question is, how does Ezekiel portray the Nebuchadnezzar's siege of Jerusalem to the captives in Babylon? So if you read chapter 4, verse 1, thou also, son of man, take thee a tile. Another translation? Okay, brick. I think brick's probably the easiest thing for us to understand here. He said, take a brick and lay it before you, and portray upon it the city, even Jerusalem. We would actually say, do what?
Build a model.
Yeah, what? Say it again.
Build a model.
Yeah, build a model. That's really what's happening here. You're going to build a model of what's happening, and the brick you're going to kind of engrave it, portray on it the city, and then what are you going to do? Verse 2. Okay, so you're going to lay a siege against it and build a fort against it. So you can get this image. Here's this brick. Got this picture of Jerusalem kind of drawn on it. Then we're going to build a fort around it. And we're going to cast a mount against it, set the camp also against it, and set battering rams against it round about. And moreover, take thou unto thee an iron pan, and set it for a wall of iron between thee and the city, and set thy face against it, and it shall be besieged, and thou shalt lay siege against it. This shall be a sign to the house of Israel. Now here's the interesting part. At this time, he's where? Just a reminder. Where is he?
He's out on the plain.
Okay, well, he went back to his house. Okay, he went back to, but where is that at? Not where? Yeah, not in Jerusalem. He's been taken exile, right? He's been taken captive, part of that wave, right? So he's up by the river Chebar, got a house up there, a place he's living, in Babylonian territory. And out of sight then of what's happening where? In Jerusalem. So what are you going to do in order to help the people that are around him understand what's happening in Jerusalem? We're going to draw them a picture. We're going to draw them a picture. You know, you think about how imagery works even, in modern times, and the pictures and the way things can be portrayed in certain ways that kind of help us understand it better, and that's true for them too. So he draws this picture. Here's Jerusalem. It's got this besiegement. You show these things that you've built around it. You've got this kind of this pan that's laying between you and it, and demonstrating this iron wall. All of these things are intended to symbolize what's happening, or going to happen, in Jerusalem when it relates to this besiegement. Verse 4. So then lie thou also upon thy left side, and lay the iniquity of the house of Israel upon it, according to the number of the days that thou shalt lie upon it, thou shalt bear their iniquity. For I have laid upon thee the years of their iniquity, according to the number of the days, 390 days, so shalt thou bear the iniquity of the house of Israel. When thou hast accomplished them, lie again on thy right side, and thou shalt bear the iniquity of the house of Judah 40 days. I have appointed thee each day for a year. Therefore thou shalt set thy face towards the siege of Jerusalem, and thine arm shall be uncovered. Thou shalt prophesy against it, and behold, I will lay bands upon thee, and thou shalt not turn thee from one side to another till thou hast ended the days of thy siege. Lots of pictures going on, right? Build a picture of what's going on in Jerusalem, Ezekiel. Okay, did that. Now I want you to lay down, and I want you to lay on what? The left side for 390 days. A long time. Okay, now, does that mean 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? I don't know how else to argue it, but there may be some language that we'll see eventually that might indicate that he would be able to what at times? Because he's going to have to be able to eat, because there's going to be some pretty interesting bread made. If you've studied ahead, you know what I'm talking about. There's going to be some interest. So he's going to, right? But he's going to, and it seems like he's the one that has to make that bread, which I would argue would be nearly impossible to do if I'm right. Now maybe that happens later, so we'll get to it, right? I'm just trying to feed thoughts and give you food for thought. Maybe that occurs actually potentially when? After all these days are over, right? So keep that in mind. It could happen after the so 390 left side, then what? Right side for 40 more. First set seems to be on whose behalf? Israel, and then the 40 on behalf of Judah. Now, I guess the great question then is, and I think that was kind of question 2, what's the significance of that? So you first.
430 years.
Okay, so if you added them up, that's 430. What significance would that have?
The years they were in captivity.
That's right. That is the length of time they spent in Egypt, right? That's the length of time they spent in Egypt. If you go to Exodus chapter 12, verse 40, Exodus chapter 12, verse 40, spells it out in those exact words, that the time of their sojourn there in Egypt was 430 years. So it may have that implication. The math works. Some argue that the 390, and then they get into the 390 could be measured from, who was kind of the first one that got Israel going bad to begin with? I'm not trying to trick you. Well, it's got to come after him. He's still United Kingdom. Jeroboam, right? Okay. So if you did from them up until the destruction of Jerusalem, 390. So you can measure it from that way as it relates to Israel. We see this similar kind of thing happen. Again, I say similar. I don't know that they're comparing to parallel to each other. They're similar. It's kind of the opposite, though. When in Numbers, in the book of Numbers, Moses has to pick out some spies. They go into the land. How long were they in there looking around? 40 days. They were spying out the land 40 days, and when they come out, they give a bad report. A whole problem occurs. God says, you're going to be sojourners for how long? 40 years, 1 year for every day that you were spying out the land. It's reversed. He put a year on for every day that they were spying out the land and brought back the bad report. In Ezekiel's time, he takes years and makes them days in order for Ezekiel to give this imagery. Anybody got anything different than that, by the way? You could be just as right as I am, by the way. Because he doesn't tell us, right? He doesn't necessarily, and every time I say that, I just remind you that though you may not know or I may not know, I'm going to assume that Ezekiel does. He understands better than we what's going on here, and God chose this timing. But the point is, and again, we can get lost in that. We can get lost in what kind of brick was it? I don't know, right? What did he use to engrave that brick with? What did he build the fort with? I don't know exactly. Where did he get the metal pan from? Right? We could go down that road. But we'd miss the point. The point is, he's trying God, without him having to do what? Say anything. He's giving a symbolic, figurative picture of what God is doing to his people in judgment. And you walk into Ezekiel's house, and you see him laying there on his side, and you come back the next day, and he's what? Still there. He's still there. He's still there. He's still there. You want me to keep going to 390? No, you're good? And then you walk in on day 391. And all of a sudden, he's on the other side. And you come back day 2, and now, right? It's imagery. And he's literally part of the picture. To help those who aren't witnessing what's happening in Jerusalem to realize what it must be like to be in Jerusalem. To be bound up, if you will. Can't go anywhere. Can't escape. There's a siege all the way around you, and it's the same thing day in, day out, day in, day out, day in, day out. And every day it gets harder, and every day it's more challenging, right? And so to give those folks who would go into Ezekiel's house, rather than just telling them what's really going on back in Jerusalem, they look at Ezekiel and go, wow. What misery. This is miserable enough to witness Ezekiel, but if that's the imagery of what's happening to those poor folks who happen to still be back there, the challenges are there. For Ezekiel? Yeah. I mean, he's not free to come and go. He's not free to lay on his back for a little while. You know, it definitely has all the symbolic, figurative imagery to help them visually understand what's really happening back there.
They still refuse, though.
Yeah.
Even with all the signs, that they still refuse to believe God.
Yeah. And it's amazing. And they have been refusing. And they have been rebellious. And that's been the challenge all along. Our time's up. I don't think the bell system sprung forward yet. So I think Randy may have went down and maybe start knocking on doors downstairs. But anyway, think about that a little more. We'll come back and we'll continue our study, Lord willing, on next Wednesday night. I'll mention this now, but it'll be on the website for those that are at home. It'll be on the website starting sometime tomorrow. But Sunday's sermon material, it's on the table. So I gave you a lesson that I would have preached last Sunday. It's now going to become the 27th sermon. So anyway, just the way my brain's working. But the lesson sheets for this coming Sunday, they're on the center table back there, and they're marked March 20th and the new title and everything. You'll see it back there.